Poppin', y'all. We back at it. I am your host, Shy Ill, with some more Surviving El Chapo Flores Twins content. I'm a little under the weather, but that don't stop nothing over here. Today, we're going to end it off with episode 5 of The Connect. Johnny Mitchell interviewing Charlie Webster, executive producer of Surviving El Chapo, along with 50 Cent. If you have yet to subscribe to the channel, please do. Hit the like button and notification bell so we can keep this channel moving forward. Let's get it.
Man, it's such an odyssey. Do you think we should talk about why their wives are now, or is it just Val?
No, it's both.
Okay. Do you think that's teasing it, or do you? Because I would like to know why are they locked up?
He would like to know, is it teasing it? Of course you would like to know. You didn't listen to none of it.
Yeah, but then people might just listen to this and not the series. I know,
Yeah.
I'm joking.
No. But
You're like, fair
that's
enough.
a consideration, though. I mean,
You're right, though. You're right. Or they might come listen here. I'm all right with them coming and listen here.
people have attention spans of 2-year-olds. So
I don't know. I disagree with you, but that seems to
Really?
be our.
Somebody that didn't watch the podcast talking about a 2-year-old's attention span.
I don't know. I disagree with you, but that seems to
Really?
be our MO, right? I'm just going to disagree with everything you say.
Get him,
I
Charlie.
Thanks for good podcasting.
No, I
Believe it
actually
or not.
disagree on that because I think people actually want interesting story and interesting conversation.
Yeah.
And actually, that's just dumbing people down.
So tell us then why. I mean,
I'll give you a little bit then because it's really important.
She's dying to give a little bit. He don't know none of it. So.
I'll
give you a little bit then because it's really important part of the story.
Of course. Because these women suffered a lot.
Yeah. And like Val's, Val is Jay. So Val is Jay's wife and Viviana is Pete's wife.
Yeah.
And, they've both been through a lot and both very different women. And, Val, I think is very interesting and inspirational in a way for women because she's been through a lot. I don't want to kind of like disclose things that I shouldn't because she's disclosed things to me in confidence. Yeah. But, she did go through a lot when she was younger and she was then kind of used as a drug mule.
Yeah.
Ended up getting into the life.
Yeah, she was big time.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
She was big time. She led a game. The game didn't love her back. Val has led an extraordinary life, boy.
Yeah, she was big time.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. She ended up marrying Kato, who was like head of the Latin Kings.
Oh.
Before Jay.
Right.
And there was...
It's fair to say she liked bad boys.
Well, yeah, but then there was also like, in a serious... There's a lot of manipulation and coercive control in that. And there was a lot of domestic abuse and abuse.
Some kind of accountability here, you know what I'm saying? You made choices to live that life. Some people just find a way to justify whatever. You can't just justify everything with. If you let somebody like Charlie tell it, there's no blame to the person that did it. It's just the people. Everybody manipulated the person. It's because of this that happened, or because of this. Sometimes it's not that, man. Sometimes that's just an excuse, a Band-Aid to put on it. And it seems like Charlie very happy to cover that wound up. I'm not one to just be buying but so-and-so manipulated me into this and manipulated me into that. I ain't trying to hear that. You do what you do because you do what you do. That's it.
And there was a lot of domestic abuse and abuse in that situation. Yeah. And so, yes, but at the same time, like, what some of the men do to these women is horrific.
Yeah. What some of the men that these women chose do to these women.
It's also really hard to get out of that situation.
Of course.
It's not as simple as like, I don't like what you're doing and walk.
Yeah.
It really isn't.
Of course.
And then she met Jay and she married Jay. And actually one of the reasons why Jay ended up cooperating and wanting to turn his life around is because of his family and because of Val.
Yeah.
And they wanted to try and change their life, and they did have kids, and that's what made the difference to them. And they didn't want their kids to be brought up in that life, and they didn't want their kids to do what the twins had done.
Right, of course.
And they felt like, I know I said this, but they felt like they didn't have a choice. And I know there is an argument that times that maybe they did, but when they were younger, and they felt like it was always to try and their father had this thing over them, to try and prove they're enough. And I think some of us can relate to that in many different ways with her.
That's what it is. She can relate. She can relate from her daddy issues.
To that in many different ways with her. parents or our mums and dads and what it's like in those situations.
Did Val and Vivian, sorry?
Yeah, Viv, yeah.
Did Val and Viv think they were going to have to do time when the twins first turned themselves in?
Absolutely not.
Gotcha. So how did that evolve?
So the argument, and it's an agree to disagree argument, by the wives going to prison, and they did plead guilty, it doesn't mean that they agreed. It's that they were put in a situation where they were told that if they did go to trial, they'd probably get an unfair trial because of public perception.
Of course.
So it's slightly complicated, but let me see if I can do it in like a really short, kind of like succinct way. And there's a lot of nuance, so listen to the podcast for the nuance because it plays the whole story out.
He's definitely not going to listen to the podcast, Charlie.
Because it's something that happened there, links to there, links to there, links to there, right? But as part of the cooperation deal of Jay and Pete, the twins, their wives got immunity. That's what they thought, and they were led to believe, and they were told. And there is no way, this is what Pete and Jay said, that they would have cooperated without protecting their family. So they got a visa.
Which was the whole point of them cooperating anyway, to rescue their family.
So they got a visa. They got, things for the older brother at the time was in Mexico, Armando.
Right.
So they made sure that they got self-protection and a visa, that the father got protection and a visa, and that the wives were protected from any charges associated with the drug debts or the drug dealing or anything to do with the twins' activities.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So, and that's the so-called deal, apparently, that was made. And then they proffered, the wives did proffer and gave information to, Val did. So the government actually used Val. At one point, they put her on a wiretap.
Stop proffering. Stop proffering. God.
Yeah, well.
That's easy for Johnny to say with his little temple massage. Stop proffering. Stop snitching. They were already in the shit, bro. They were already in there deep. They were trying to get themselves a cushy deal. And after all was said and done and all the work that they did for the federal government came and stuck it to them.
What I find so interesting about this is by the end of the season, you decide who you think was right.
For sure.
Because you could argue that the government didn't, and even the government, I spoke to the former US attorney who did this case, who did the Chapo case with the twins, worked for a decade with the twins on the Chapo case. That was like, did the government really need to go after the wives? Was that a good use of government resource?
Was that the moral thing to do? Nobody ever wants to ask what's right. Of course it wasn't right.
Well, was it the moral?
No, for the government to go after the women who have children. Yeah. Like it's
up. Exactly. Yeah.
But you got to know that's up. Like, where's the lawyer at? Also, I have so many questions.
And also, what I questioned was why now? Yeah. Why didn't they do this back? This is so I'm going all over the houses, but like the one.
Because from my understanding, it was from 2008 to all the way to now to like 2020 or some shit.
Wives have been charged with conspiracy to money launder from drug debts that were collected back in 2008 when the twins went to prison.
Right.
So sorry, the twins, I know we were saying 2005, but the twins went to prison in 2008.
Yeah.
So what they're now going to prison for in 2023, and actually Val's going to prison in 2024, is for money from 2008. So I questioned why it wasn't then and why they waited for the twins to come out of prison 12 years later to then go after the wives, because that's what happened.
And what about the statute of limitations? Like, I guess the statute goes back further than 15 years. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, and how much time are they getting?
3.5 years each. Yeah. But they thought they were going to get more.
The system's bloodthirsty.
Absolutely.
So and then it's the question of like, is that a good use of resource? And I want to try and be a bit like both sides, because when I spoke to the US government, because I did get both sides, which I think was really important. And that's how I round the whole thing up, is like, I do speak to the US attorney who worked the Chapo case with the twins, and he said he spent more time with the twins than he did with his own family. Wow. And he's fond of the twins, and he thought they were nothing but honest. Yeah. They did get a little bit of trouble going back to the baby, the Bentley, and the billboard.
Yeah.
But other than that, they were nothing but honest.
Which really isn't that bad. That's just some hopeless romantic shit. But they could have been doing worse if they had the bread to get billboards, babies, and Bentleys. They could have been putting bags on people's heads, all kind of foul shit they could have done while they were in the joint.
But other than that, they were nothing but honest. They gave the information. It was an all or nothing deal. Now, the argument is that the government are arguing that the twins broke the promise and the trust because the wives did have some money. They gave 14 million to the government, which is what the government wanted.
Right.
But the wives argue that there was immunity, and they knew that they had some of the other money
I see.
that they had to live off, and one of them had to move 16 times due to viable death threats.
Right.
So they were single moms. They had no way of earning.
Yeah.
They were saying that and the government were aware of some of the money, and they're saying, well, the government broke the trust because the government agreed that this immunity deal.
Yeah.
And the twins and the wives gave everything, gave all the information, and the government broke the trust, whereas the government are arguing that
that's my understanding, is that the wives disclosed this money to the feds, and they were like, we're not dealing with that money right now, and the wives just went on living off the money. Then they came back later and crucified them for it.
Government are arguing that the wives broke the trust because they did use some
They didn't
drug
disclose
debt money.
the drug money.
Well, apparently the wives said they did, and the government weren't interested because they just wanted that 40 million of which it was called DC money from DC, and they just wanted Chapo. So all they focused on was getting Chapo, and at this point they didn't have Chapo, so they didn't care about the wives.
So obviously this is a different U.S. attorney than the one that dealt with the twins and the Chapo case.
Yeah, because now all those attorneys have gone, so it's different prosecutors, and that's what they're saying is one of the defense's reasons why is because they're new prosecutors who want a prosecution and are going after the wives. Whereas if it was the old prosecutors, it would have been a different case. Just to throw in a bit of a bombshell, one of the prosecutors who worked the case, called Thomas Shakeshaft, who was really close to the twins.
We're going to look into Thomas Shakeshaft. I need to know his story.
Who was really close to the twins and the wives, died a week before the wives' pre-trial hearing.
Oh, wow. So he couldn't stand up for him.
Yeah, and he was meant to. He was meant to be a witness.
Wow, that's crazy. So did they end up going to trial for this money
No,
laundering?
they didn't go to trial. So they wanted, one of the wives, Val, did want to go to trial, but didn't go to trial because they were advised that they wouldn't get a fair trial because of perception.
Yeah, and if you blow trial in the feds, man, you would do 10 years.
Yeah, and they would do more time because originally Val was looking at 10 years.
Yeah.
And so in the end, it went through a lot of pre-trial hearings, which I sat and listened to. And in the end, they were advised to take the plea deal.
Did they have good lawyers? Did they have good attorneys? Because the government should be sued. I mean, I would be suing to the day I die for breaking this agreement. I just find it unbelievable.
But it's also more complicated than that because the government is saying that agreement didn't exist.
Yeah.
And that the agreement didn't exist, where otherwise they're saying it did exist.
Right.
And then there's like a bit of, again, there's a lot of nuance to this. This isn't straightforward black and white.
But
so
there's enough things on paper that you could read that say this, that, and the other.
I worked through this in the second season, is that when Pete testified against Chapo and he came face to face with him, they prepped him for like 18 months to take the stand every single day. They prepped Pete, right? And part of Chapo's defense was questioning Pete for the deal that he got, and it was brought up about getting the wives immunity. So Pete said under oath in the court case against Chapo that he did get immunity for his wife, and nobody questioned it.
Oh,
so you're like,
that sounds like
so
proof to
that
me.
should be. I mean, I know the government has done some egregious things, but this is, now we're moving on to 20 years since they turned themselves in. Do you think?
No, 2008.
Oh, okay. It's 2005 is when they went to Mexico and first met Chapo.
Yeah, and 2008 is when they went.
So we're now 15 years in. By the time they get out, though, it's going to be, a 20-year
stint
20 years
of trying to change their lives, basically.
And are the wives living with the husbands in the undisclosed location?
Yeah.
And then,
well, one of them goes to prison, like as we're recording,
right? Wow.
And the other one goes to prison at the top of the year.
And how many kids do they each have? Each of the
I don't want to say how many.
But they have a few kids each.
Yeah, they do. And actually, one thing which was really powerful, which is in the second season of Surviving El Chapo, is I did sit down with some of the younger kids.
Wow.
And it was like, I was just listening to it because I'm just locking up the final episodes right now.
Yeah.
And it is so powerful, I have to say. Like, I just sat on the floor, like we cleared, we kind of cleared. And when I just sat on the floor and they sat on like chairs, and I just sat and listened to them, and I was like, do you want to tell me, your story?
Yeah.
Do you want to, talk to me? Because I got to know them like quite a lot, and the kids are so lovely. They're wonderful children. They did visit. I mean, one of them says how many days she spent in prison as a child visiting her father. Yeah. And again, it's something that, I really like to challenge people on perception. When we first started talking, you were like, firstly you thought I was Australian, but no.
Charlie, enough is enough. You gotta let bygones be bygones. Jeez.
Firstly you thought I was Australian, but no, you was like, oh, these are rats. And it's like, well, maybe get to know why. And to me, it's nothing's ever straightforward, right?
Of course not.
So like, even with the, with the kids, it's like, the kids had a great relationship with their fathers, even though their father's in prison. Mm-hmm. I don't know, there's a lot of fathers out there that haven't even spent that much time with their kids.
Of course.
And every weekend they were in prison, and they talk about the trauma of that as well, though. So it's not like, oh, it was totally fine.
Now, will the kids be able, if they want, to have protection like when they're adults, or does the government protection run out at a certain point?
I probably can't say any of that.
Really?
No.
Okay.
Because it's really their children, and it's really important that nothing's disclosed about them.
I thought that was just like a legal. I'm just curious. Like, I would like to know, because the president's kids get protection for life. You know what I mean?
How much does that cost?
Now, but then if I say yes or no, then it lets people know whether they've got protection or not. Right?
Oh, sure. So like, does Pete? Could they make the choice, like, say 20 years from now, all his enemies he assumes are gone? Could they tell the government if they wanted to, even tomorrow, hey, we don't want protection anymore. We want to just go back to living.
Ladies did that early.
Maybe we want to go back to Chicago. Do they have the right to do that?
They're not going to go.
They're not going to do that. But do you think they'll live? Do you think Pete and Jay will live the rest of their life in WITSEC?
Well, they can't live the rest of their life in WITSEC.
Or I'm sorry, witness protection?
No, they can't live the rest of their life in witness protection. The government can't give them witness protection for the rest of their life. That's
my question, essentially. Okay, so it will run out at a certain point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why are you pressing me on?
Yo, Charlie, you didn't want, because he's a fucking plant. That's why. Charlie, you didn't want to get into it, and then you got all the way into it. You didn't want to say yes or no, and then you ended up saying yes or no. You let this guy talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why are you pressing me on this?
No, it's an interesting question. I know.
Yeah, but it's not. Like, it's not for me to say, because there have been viable threats on their life. So it's
still, even today. Wow.
They cooperated against Chapo.
Yeah. Right. And their father, was tragically killed. What year was that?
That was in 2000 I'd say 9.
All right.
Must have been 2009.
Yeah.
Because it was quite early days.
Right.
And they did get a threat that said, we'll come after you when you're least expecting it.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's a tough one. And that's, people can, like you said, people after listening to this, after going and listening to Surviving El Chapo, can make the decision about whether they think it was worth it for them. Do you think talking to them
and
now? And
that's the big question.
Do they, obviously, I assume they think it's worth it? Pete and Jay?
Listen, for as much loss as was involved, what was the other option? The other option was their family get wiped out, and they wouldn't be having the moments that they have with their kids now. They wouldn't have the goodbyes and the I love yous to their moms that are going to prison for a year or two. That would just be blown off the map. It's easy to say that it wasn't worth it because, the old man died They've been on the run. They suffered plenty. The feds came after them again. You know, it's been 20 years. They don't get to live no peace. So we can say it wasn't worth it in that aspect, but they're alive to go through that. They're alive to, you know, to hug their children. So it depends on what's your idea of worth it. Death or struggle?
I've asked them many times, and I think when I ask Pete, he says sometimes, I don't know. Like Pete's a bit more kind of sometimes I think, was it all worth it? And it depends which day it is.
Right.
And I think it's really, really upsetting that his wife's going to prison.
Of course.
Because Viviana's like definitely struggled with this whole situation. And I think she's very scared. Mm-hmm. And I think they're very scared. So I think that, you know, if you ask Pete, it's a bit more like, it depends what day is his answer.
Do you think he resents Jay at all for bringing that to him?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
No, because I don't think he's that kind of, it's a good question though. Like, it's a good question and something maybe I haven't asked that.
Yeah.
Because for me, they make the decisions together, so they don't ever see it like that. I think there's like some arguments about certain things, but it's never about that because they both agreed together to do that.
Right, because Jay wouldn't have done it if
because
Pete hadn't
initially
agreed.
Pete actually said no.
Oh,
he was like, "Are you
interesting.
out of your mind?
Yeah.
Don't talk to me." And then it didn't get brought up again.
Wow.
And then like several days later, Pete phoned Jay and went, "So how would we do it?"
All right.
So, and so Jay would never have done it. They only make decisions together. So I don't think there's any resentment there and not anything I've remotely picked up on.
Right.
But I think with Pete, it's a bit more like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because look at our situation. Whereas with Jay, I think he still feels it's the right thing.
Yeah.
So I think there's a slight difference with Jay. I think he feels that like, you know, he's given his kids, a different life, and he has like.
If the regret was going to come from somewhere, it would have to come from being involved in the game to begin with.
A different life, and he has like.
Yeah.
You know, they're not doing any. You know, they're really well educated.
Yeah.
They've got an amazing education. Like, again, I don't want to give too much away, but honestly, like, if they are punished for the rest of their lives, they have changed the cycle.
Sure.
And that's what I find so fascinating.
Sure.
Like, they have changed the legacy of the Flores name.
Yeah.
Even if Jay and Pete and their wives suffer for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And obviously there's some suffering for the children because, like, their mothers are about to go in prison, which is awful. And some of the kids are young.
Yeah.
Like, again, like, I don't even give ages away on the podcast, but they're not.
So stop talking about it. Stop saying how young they are. Nobody would know they had young kids. People would think they had teenagers. Talk too much, Charlie.
But they're not grown.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pain there because, you know, they suffered through, you know, they saw when Val was arrested, you know, they saw Val being arrested and the kids got put AK-47s to their heads. And some of the kids were like, you know, arrested. And it was just, I don't know. To me, that's like,
That's what your taxes are going for. So the DEA agents, some bum can put a gun to a little 3-year-old's head. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's awful. Like, Val talks us through what that was like, and the kids tell me, you know, how upsetting and what that was like.
They couldn't have just called them and been like, "Hey, you got to turn yourself in. We're gonna raid your house."
Yeah, and they cornered off the whole area and put a SWAT team.
Make a spectacle out of it.
Yeah.
When it's like, you have our numbers. You're paying
and also,
to protect us.
And also, what's
going on?
They're also out on what is it called? I've just totally forgotten. Come on, give me the word.
Cul-de-sac? What?
No, as in like obviously the feds know where they are because they're not out on parole. But what's the other word?
Probation.
Parole?
Thank
you. Yeah. So they've got 5 years probation where they're monitored all the time.
He just told you protecting them, and you still come over there and raid them and arrest the kids
all the time.
So it's a really good question that you asked because it's like, why did they need to do that? Because the twins are monitored all the time.
Yeah.
And they're out there, you know, they have officers who they have to check in with all the time.
Right.
So the fact that they put a SWAT team in for the wives, when they're not drug dealing, they weren't doing anything.
Yeah.
They were basically using some money that they thought they could use because they got an immunity deal back from 2008 to pay their rent and to pay their kids' education, basically.
Totally. I think it's...
But the $1 million question is what you asked. It's the question
is... Why?
It's was it worth it?
Yeah.
Was it worth it?
Yeah. From where I sit, no. But then they
Why?
got kids. For me, because if I've got my family, if I have my kids and my wife, the most important people to me, and I have $100 million, do you know what that does in a place like Argentina? It buys you the country. Do you know what that does in a place like Uruguay or, Brazil? Like, I would rather go be free in a country that's not mine if I'm with the most important people.
They couldn't because they felt they would have been killed. So for them, they think that
This guy, they're not going to be found in Argentina.
The situation they have now is better because they don't think any of them would have been alive.
Right.
They think they would have all been killed and the whole...
Listen, the question of whether it's worth it or not is not going to be answered until they're both, or all four of them are 65 years old and they have their grandchildren and they get to sit around the Thanksgiving table and say, okay, we're all here right now. This generation's educated. This generation don't have nothing to do with the game. It's done. That, to me, that's when you'll know whether it's worth it or it wasn't worth it.
Right.
They think they would have all been killed and the whole family would have been slaughtered.
Right.
So that's coming from their, and they know their situation.
what's funny
we
is
don't know exactly what that was like, right?
Now they definitely would not have had that kind of threat because Sinaloa has been fractured. They're coming down hard on them. I mean, we know for a fact, we've had people on here who have interviewed guys who ratted on Chapo, because a lot of people are ratting on Chapo. Mayo's son ratted on Chapo. All of the kingpins in Mexico rat on each other. Chapo ratted.
But that's
on
my point
of
when we first started talking, when you were like, they're rats. And I'm like,
but
everybody cooperates. Even their own sons, even Chapo's own son,
Right.
even Mayo's own son. Like, they cooperate against their own fathers.
Totally. My argument,
and that's what I think people should understand.
Right,
It's not
it's
not. They're not an anomaly.
But what I'm saying
they
is
are
too,
because they went to the police themselves.
But what I'm saying is the threat, in my opinion, in America or outside of Mexico is over exaggerated because this guy who was a rat was in Mexican newspapers walking around no bodyguards with his girlfriend at SeaWorld a couple of months ago. This was a guy who basically was.
I think he's talking about a mini leak. See, now when dude's head blows up, when they say, dude got caught up at Disneyland and they blow his dome up, then Johnny be like, oh, maybe I was wrong. Johnny, go cross them little mustache trucker hat Mexicans that you go cross them. Let's see how far you walk. Let's see if you get to go to SeaWorld.
This was a guy who basically was supposed to be where the Chapitos are today, in terms of like their prominence. They were the guy who Mayo Damasol. He was the guy that Mayo gave the reins to, and that's how the war between Chapo's sons were supposed to be next up when Chapo went down. But there was this guy Damasol who Mayo granted the power to, and that's where the fracturing went. Damasol eventually ratted on everybody, gave up everybody. He's walking around in America with no protection, no nothing. So that's my only argument is that I think I always think the cartel does not act. They're very rational people. They're logical people. They don't kill on this side. They really don't, especially now because they know they're going to get caught. They do that in Mexico because they control everything. And they're more fractured and weaker than ever. That is my opinion.
It's interesting because Los Chapitos.
I offered up the same thing the other day and I said, who's going to stand up for Chapo? Why is Sammy the Bull walking around? Who's going to stand up for John Gotti and come get Sammy the Bull? Maybe nobody. Maybe everybody's washed up. Or maybe there's that one person that comes into power and says, we got a couple loose ends we need to tie up and are quite capable of tying up them loose ends.
Well, Los Chapitos are obviously in charge at the moment of Sinaloa, and they're far more chaotic and violent than Chapo.
Right.
And not as controlled in that sense.
Right.
So, and also the drug war is worse than ever right now.
Right.
But in terms of like the danger on the twins, that's not what they say.
Look, I guess they know better than me. I'm looking at it from like a numbers perspective and a and anecdotes, and you know, obviously, like they're so close to it. Look, they're more worried about their kids. Like that's their number one priority. God bless them. Truly, you've changed my mind. You've changed my mind in 2 hours. You know what I mean? So, but this is compelling.
But look, yeah, at the end of the day, it's not for me to like
change nobody's mind.
I wanted to try and challenge a little bit of your opinion because, you know, you can still think, anybody can think what they want, but I think at least be informed about it. So at least I'm not saying that you're not.
That's exactly what you're saying, Charlie. She had his head again.
I just mean listen and listen to the whole story, be informed about it, and then, you know, make your own opinion and your judgment. And again, it's not.
And that's where the problem lies with everything, with every story. Listen, us as a people, I do it too. I've done it too. We hear a story, the easiest thing that comes to our mind, the path of least resistance, oh, that's it. That's what happened right there. Till it's proven wrong, then we figure out another one. It's like, come on, man.
I didn't want people to think I'm like just giving one side, because I'm not, because I do challenge them. Like we did sit and have a really frank conversation because something happened within my own family at the same time as I was recording. And I did tell them about it, and I did really challenge them. And that's when, you know, they've said to me a lot actually through this whole process of spending the last couple of years with them and working with them, that it made them think a lot, and it made them think about their own decisions and actually what they wanted for their lives and some of the things that they've done. Yeah. And we had some really frank conversations. It's not like I've just sat there going, oh, you know, like I'm so, you know, we've had some really honest conversations, and I feel like that's what's built this kind of respect between us, because I've seen a lot of destruction of the other side of what it can do through addiction. So
are they getting a piece of this?
Are they getting a piece of what?
Like using their
My
names?
life.
No, like for the podcast series and potentially like the TV series that this develops, because I could completely see it developing, especially with Curtis at the reins.
Maybe it already is.
There we go. So do you have to pay them for their likeness? Do they at least get like?
I mean, it's their story, bro. What are you talking about?
How do they earn money now, I guess? Now, if they're in witness protection, they can't go back to drug dealing.
It's a good question.
Yeah, like how do they make money?
I can't say anything to do with this project.
Okay.
But
like, can they go get jobs?
Well, again, this is the thing. So Pete has a legitimate business that he's trying to run, and it's really interesting because he's using logistics to try because that's his knowledge.
Which is what they were brilliant at, logistics. Brilliant at logistics, bro. Brilliant.
Sure.
And Pete, and to try because that's his knowledge.
Sure.
And Pete, and Jay wants to, tell his story more, and he wants it to be motivational. So he's actually started to do classes with, I wonder what you think of this, with law enforcement about trying to teach them more about the insight of drug trafficking and how to change things. And he said, if I can have an impact on the thing that I contributed to, then that's worth everything. So he's under protection, starting to do law enforcement. Look at your face.
I don't like it.
I know you would.
You took it all back right there.
The reaction is, I don't love it.
But I think it's an amazing thing to do.
Of course you do. You're never gonna have the visceral. You're never gonna have that visceral feeling, Charlie. You don't come from where we come from. You know, to be a cooperator where we come from is the worst. I mean, all you got to do is listen to Val the first 2-3 times that it came up to her. You know what I'm saying? How she was sick about it. We don't do well with that. You know what I'm saying? Some of us, you know, no matter the scenario, will not pick up the phone and dial 911. You know what I'm saying? That's where we come from. That's something you could never understand. But if you remember the movie Catch Me If You Can, he's basically doing the Frank Abagnale. Frank Abagnale was a con man. He was so cold at it that the feds came and they asked him questions, and he started working for them and teaching them what they needed to know to beat that game. It is what it is.
I think it's an amazing thing to do because,
I think
he could sit there and just like...
For him to have the forgiveness, though, of the same law enforcement who raided his house and took his wife away.
You know what, Johnny? I asked that exact question. I asked that same thing. And I said, the same people... because he gave a class the same weekend his wife got sentenced. And I saw them and I saw how much pain and how much suffering and emotion and like struggle it was bringing to Val. Like I sat with her and, you know, and the impact it's having on her mental health. Like, you know, I spent time with her and it's hard. But then at the same time, Jay's working with law enforcement, but that's not how they see it. And again, no matter what you think, and you can judge them all day.
And will law enforcement ever forgive them? Will them cops in that class ever look at them and say they can learn something from them? Or they just look at them like, you know, scumbags?
Their mentality is fascinating. Because they don't hold that same. Because to me, I would be a bit like that. Because I feel like, well, why you've come after my wife, you know, my partner. But now I'm kind of helping you, but he doesn't see it like that. He's not helping law enforcement, and he wants to change a wider, it's holistic, right? It's a bigger picture. He wants to have an impact and do something and leave some kind of legacy and show his children to be proud of him. He wants his children to be proud of him. And he wants to be motivational. And in the end, what he wants to do, you know, you ask about earning money, is he also wants to, in the end, influence young people and try and get them off the street. And he knows that, you know, I don't know whether that's something that, you know, I don't know why you do this podcast. Is it to raise awareness? Is it just...
No, not really.
No? Okay.
Just to glorify some shit he dabbled in.
Earn some money? Just for a laugh? Just for kicks?
Yeah.
Or is it actually because you want to spread a message, you want to talk about things, give an insight that people maybe
if
not
we
have?
can, great. Like this episode is different than a lot. So I love telling stories. I try not to be anything but...
You just don't love reading stories or listening to them.
So I love telling stories. I try not to be anything but entertaining. But obviously my opinion seeps out. But like,
No
you know, but yeah, no, it's never, we never try to do any good for the community or spread a message. I want to make that very clear. It's purely,
but it's giving insight, right?
It's giving insight, absolutely.
And insight.
So what's wrong? What's wrong with giving anything to the community? What's wrong with doing anything or giving a message to anybody? Buddy don't want that responsibility because he's a plant.
Fascinating, because this is things that maybe people wouldn't know about unless you heard it from lived experience and from your own personal experience, right? And that's the same as like telling the Surviving El Chapo story of the Flores Twins. Is they've never spoken, nobody ever knew that story, and like so many, there was news reports about them. The only people that were ever talking about them was from the US government side and the Fed side. So it's now hearing it from the horse's mouth of what it was like for them and what they felt like.
This is dope, what you've done. So plug away, socials, all of that. Tell them where to get the podcast.
Right here at Shy Ill's Reaction Channel, where we cover everything Flores Twins and Cartel related, because that's what y'all want to see.
Again, you know, it's not about judgment or opinion. It's a fascinating story in the way
and that's it right there. It's a fascinating story. Movie form, TV form, audio form, whatever it is.
Done it is very detailed, and you really get in the moment, and it's very present.
It's like listening to your favorite HBO show.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah,
seriously.
and I really worked hard on that and making sure you felt what it was like, and it wasn't just a passive listen. So you can listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah,
basically, it's on iHeart. Made it with Lionsgate Sound, and you can just listen wherever. And my name's Charlie Webster, and I am British, not Australian. And you can find me on socials, and it's just Charlie Webster. Yeah,
hell yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, I hope to, I do hope to see it on the screen someday soon. But yeah, the podcast is, you know, I listened to a couple of episodes, and I'm gonna go back and I can play the whole thing out. It's
sure.
great. So thank you for coming on here, Charlie.
Thank you for having me.
Congrats on the success. Go follow her. And we will see you next time.
Not too sure how I feel about this Johnny Mitchell guy. He seems like a plant to me. I don't know. Whatever. It is what it is. And I ain't Mr. Conspiracy Theory that thinks everybody's a plant. I just feel like these guys blow up to do just that. To not do anything for the community. To not give you any advice. This is just glorification. It's just let's hear the story. None of it is to help anybody. And he made that very clear. So that guy. But I will compare Johnny Mitchell to the person out there that listens or heard the slightest thing about the story, and they only focus on one thing. They're snitches on the way in, they're snitches on the way out, and they miss the rest of the story. You miss everything else. The people that go in and they only hear one thing and they lock everything else out. Johnny was that guy. He went in there screaming snitch, 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 but he didn't know shit about the story. That's cool. They snitched. That's a part of the story. Only a part. By the end of it, he was fascinated by the rest of the story. He'd have probably been fascinated if he had listened to it to begin with. But do not close your mind to a story simply because there's something in it that you don't like, because you're not developing yourself like that. You just walking around with 15 words in your head. Rat, snitch, this, that, the other. So do yourself a service, you know what I'm saying? And don't have a visceral feeling to words or to the things people did. Listen to the story, then make up your mind.